Back in the mythical time known as June, I was going to review Nobody. It just came out. Yes, I'm going to be in there early with a new film, going to get it reviewed, and then I didn't for 4 months. Sorry. But now, we're back, and we're going to review Nobody. Nobody released this year to pretty much no fanfare or any real media attention. I can't even remember how I stumbled upon it, but my god, I am so happy that I did, because this film is a belter. Nobody stars Bob Odenkirk as Hutch Mansell, a pretty average guy living a pretty average life. Well, actually, his life's pretty boring. The opening of it's so good to show you how boring his life is. Till one fateful night, when two robbers, unluckily enough, stumbled into his house. After hearing the commotion downstairs, he goes and gets himself a golf club. And as he gets behind one of the robbers, he does absolutely nothing. Lets him go, goes back to his mundane life. But the next day, he realises his daughter's kitty cat bracelet has been stolen. And that was, sadly, the straw that broke the camel's leg. Hump neck. It broke the camel. With this new information, he decides to go and track down said thief. And this is when you start realising there was a wee bit more to Hutch than meets the eye. He does eventually catch up to them, and they don't have it. He doesn't know where it is, and decides to head home. Job's a good one. What can you do? On the way home, he takes the bus. But this isn't no ordinary bus. Well, it is actually an ordinary bus. But Russian gangsters end up on it. Reasons. Plot device. The Russians get on the bus and start hassling a lassie. And Hutch, with a lovely smile and a glorious song, Hutch decides to kind of go at it with them. And it's a gloriously brutal scene.
I'm gonna fuck you up.
Which sets off the rest of the film, where we find out that one of the Russians that he actually battled was the brother of the head Russian guy of some Russian mob thing, who's keeping an eye on a lot of Russian money. It's all sounding awfully familiar. Once big head guy gets involved, we find out who Hutch really is. He's known as an auditor, aka an assassin for those organisations with 3 letters in their name. Why an auditor, you may ask? Well, would you like an auditor showing up to your door? Eh? Fine, moving on. In a year where action films were very much leaning towards the bombastic superhero versions of action, this kind of darker, gritty, raw, violent film was a breath of fresh air. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't a straight edge kind of like action film. It was pretty much a dark comedy, but it gave me the buzz that John Wick gave me when I first seen that. It feels fresh, even though it's very much not fresh, because it's kind of like John Wick. Let's kick this off with Hutch, one of my favourite types of characters. And I don't mean because he's stoic or funny or over the top. No. It's because he can take a kicking as much as he gives a kicking. We get introduced to the real Hutch when he's fighting the mobsters on the bus. And it is very brutal and violent. But it has that John Wick kind of style of fighting. If John Wick was a bit more rough around the edges, and I kind of like that. It was messy, but yet it wasn't sloppy. He still felt like a badass, but not a superhero. And one of the key moments of that for me was this moment here. He's actually out of breath. And I mean, when do you ever see that in an action film anymore, where your protagonist feels human? It really reminds me of Jackie Chan films. I know, like, this is super violent and loads of stabbing and breaking of arms. Not very Jackie Chan, but bear with me. I do have a reason for this. In Jackie Chan films, he never feels like a superhero, even though he is, because he gets beat up. He actually doesn't feel indestructible. He feels like somebody you can hurt. He's just better at fighting than you are. And that's what Hutch feels like. And he does get beat up bad. He gets stabbed and everything. I love that because it means I will root for them more. I will root for them more. Wow. Weird tongue twister. Also, huge props to Big Bob for this one because he was in so much of this. Like, from watching it seemed to be him doing the whole fight scene. And man, that's always cool to see the actor kind of throwing himself into the role, so big props to you, guy. Oh, something just occurred to me. I'm comparing this to Big John again. Sue me. It's hard not to. I always found John a bit boring. I hate saying that, sorry, John McFans, but John himself is a bit dull. And Hutch isn't. I like Hutch's character better. He's not as bland, there's more going on with him. I found Bob Odenkirk's performance way more compelling because when he was just everyday guy, he did feel like a guy who was a bit down in his luck, living an ordinary life. Just a guy. But when he finally snaps and becomes who he truly is, he revels in it. He's happy to be back. It's like the murder and violence is something that he wants, and it's odd to watch. It makes him way more complex, but it makes him kind of sinister, as he puts it.
Remember who we used to be? I do.
And that's a whole theme of this film, is getting back to who he used to be, which has got way more levels than just I need to go kill these people because they killed my dog, you know? Even though it is all about him trying to find a bracelet. Like, genuinely, that's the most of the story is hinging on him finding a bracelet. The fighting, the action, the gunplay, the explosions, the car chases, they're all done really well. Actually, really well. I've thoroughly enjoyed them. But most modern day action, if we're honest, can do that. Like, it's a normal thing nowadays, is to be good at action. It's weird to say, considering I'm not a fan of a bunch of stuff because of CGI, but when they don't use that, they still make cool things. So why is it this film appeals to me more? Other action films than now, like, what other action films have I watched recently that's actually interested me? There's nothing really out there now that got me. There's some like smaller ones, and I don't want to bring them up because they're great because they're smaller. Big action films, I don't know. There's nothing that kind of tickles my fancy, shall we say. What is it about this film that actually makes it a must watch for me this year? I'm about to tell you. It doesn't feel like a film from 2021. Nobody has this 80s, 90s action vibe to it. And I live for that stuff. And you know, if it's got anything to do with that in it, I'm going to be a part of it. Like, I'm going to be all about it. The reason for this is how it handles the comedy. Because action films are quite funny at times. It's an action film. They tend to be less heavy. And to tell you how it does the comedy well, I need to bring up something that I've brought up many times before, and it's how modern action handles comedy. Okay, here's my old man screaming at clouds moment. Are you ready? I find modern films make fun of one-liners and the crazy situations they're in. Not for in-world benefit, but for us. Like, they'll give a one-liner and then they'll point out how dumb that one-liner is. It's almost as if they're going to look at the camera and go, hey, that's for you. That joke right there is for you, because we are so afraid to let you make a judgment on it that we need to tell you how you feel about it. And I actually hate it. Here's a good example for you. I have found a way to make this about Predator. Would it be one of my videos if I didn't bring it back to Predator? I don't think so. So, in The Predator, we have this moment here with Olivia Munn.
Why do you call it the Predator?
It's a nickname. You know, the data suggests that it tracks its prey, exploits weakness, seems to, well, enjoy it.
It's not a predator, that's a sports hunter.
Sorry?
A predator kills its prey to survive. I mean, what you're describing is more like a bass fisherman.
Ha 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 ha! Look, the filmmakers were so silly calling it a predator. Look, we are so clever pointing out how silly we all are. I don't even have words to describe how angry that actually makes me, because it takes away from the world that they're in, and it's up to us to make fun of it, not them. Could you actually imagine that in the original? Like this moment with Jesse Ventura.
You're hit. You're bleeding, man.
I ain't got time to bleed.
Okay. You got time to duck?
Instead of that happening, we had this. Oh man, you're bleeding. I ain't got time to bleed. Well, have you got time to, bleed out? Because that's what's going to happen. Ain't that right, folks? He's going to bleed out if he doesn't deal with that. Do you see my problem? I actually hate the Predator. It's making me not like my favourite movie monster. How did it manage to do that to me? I may have got a little bit off topic there. Let's get back to Nobody. What was I talking about? Yes, it feels like the 90s. The dialogue and the one-liners and the jokes all feel like they're in world, and no one's pointing out how silly that dialogue is. Nobody's pointing out how ridiculous the situation is. Everybody accepts it, they're part of the world, and that's what made 90s films great. And that's what makes this film actually pretty bloody good. Because when you make fun of the world and the characters in it, how are you meant to get behind them? Okay, we're going to get any major spoilers here about the end of the film. So you can either hang about, go watch your film, or go away if you want. I don't know. I'm still going to talk about it. So at the end of the film, you find out Hutch has a brother played by RZA, and his dad ends up being a part of it as well, played by Christopher Lloyd. Now on paper, that sounds pretty badass, right? The kind of family getting together and fighting off the Russians at the warehouse factory thing. Because that's, you need to have a set piece at the end, you need to have a location you go to. It's like action film 101. But that didn't do it for me as much as I wanted it to. I'll tell you why. So up to this point, the film was pretty daft, but it stayed just under that line of ridiculous that it kept me engaged. It wasn't so over the top, I was like, wow, this is a bit dumb. Even though it was dumb. You see what I'm saying? It's like it hovered on that line and it kept me wanting to see more and keep me engaged in the story. And the reason for that was the film still felt raw. It still had a bit of grit to it. It was all guns and fisticuffs, and it meant that it wasn't as bombastic as it could be. This kept it grounded, is what I'm trying to say, in the most roundabout way of saying it. But that last fight in the factory turns into Home Alone for adults. Like, you even get a Home Alone montage of them building traps and crazy devices to take them through this, the equivalent of like a haunted house, of things will happen as you come through, and it just lost me, sadly. It did kind of lose me at this point because it crossed that line just too much and became silly. It was a shame because the rest of the film was grand. I really enjoyed it. Just, it wasn't even a bad ending, it just was a little bit too much. Well, except from the last kill. That last kill was actually brilliant because they kind of set up this happening earlier, like with the claymore and stuff. Watch it and you'll find out. Also seen Christopher Lloyd kind of shuffling about with shotguns. Yeah, there's an old man with shotguns, even in slow motion and epic music and everything playing. He was still just an old man shuffling about with shotguns. Doesn't really, hit home for me. Something I will say, the music at the end was glorious. It was You'll Never Walk Alone, and it was just to set this kind of fun tone towards that whole fight. But being from Glasgow, it just made me giggle too much because that's like a song that's played at football games, and I don't know why, it just made me laugh. So if you're Scottish, you might get a good giggle out of that song at the end. On the note of the music, it is scored beautifully. It's all music from the 60s and 70s, and it's used to complement weird bits of the action in that to get you on Hutch's side. I would let you hear some of the music because it is brilliant, but YouTube really doesn't like me. And if I put the music on, they'll... If you want to shove on your 90s nostalgia goggles and kick back to quite a fun but violent romp, Nobody's a film for you. If there's any other films you'd like to hear me ramble on about, please let me know in the comments. And if you like the video, give us a wee like, maybe subscribe, and do the whole sharing blah 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 thing. I know it's tedious me saying it, but it does actually help out. Anyway, till next time, catches.